Welcome to a special edition of The Plain Truth, a place where we explore some of the mysteries of the world around us. I'm your host, Plain, and this week we have a special guest, Clif, the developer of the WebBots. The WebBots are a way of analyzing changes in the use of language on the internet, looking for psychic glimpses of the future. For this show, we had very serious phone problems, so a lot of editing was required to make things hold together. But they did, and so now let us begin. Joining us will be Lenny and Disaster Cat. Clif, are you there? Ready to go?
Yes, I'm here. All set.
Good. Disaster Cat?
Yes.
Lenny, you ready?
We're all ready.
We're all ready. We've been ready. Okay, well then let's get going. Well, Clif, how you been doing lately?
Tired. Been to hell and back, and it's rather exhausting.
Hell and back?
Yeah, it turns out that they're keeping hell. You have to cross the River Styx, and so what they've done is they've mapped the River Styx over the Columbia, and hell's on the other side of it, about central Oregon, and it's hot down there. And it's
well, they're going to require GPS in cars in Oregon before too long, so you'll know what part of hell you're in soon, right?
Exactly, but at some point you just don't care, and then it always takes longer to get out of it than it takes to get into it. Staggeringly different in the both quality and quantity of time required to get away from hell than to get there. So it's just really interesting.
I used to live in Portland, so somehow this seems a little a
little
harsh.
No. That's actually Portland, somewhere mapped over where all those confluence of bridges are. That's actually like the gateway that you can go through to get into hell, should you happen to err in your driving. I had to go and do a chore down in Central Oregon, and I can put it that it was my ignorance that led me into hell. I had no real concept of what I was getting into. I haven't been down to Oregon driving since perhaps '83, when I was down there at Sequent and some of the other computer guys all the time, right? And in the big Silicon, the hardware side of their Silicon out. Exactly. And so I haven't been down there in a long time. And I remember, Portland was always a hellacious test of your navigational skills. No matter what this is, of course, pre-internet. But no matter what level of directions you had, you always ended up getting lost. And so over the years, I would hear people say, well, there's terrible traffic business in Portland. And I would nod my head in agreement. Yes, I've been there. I've driven through that. It's awful. If you get into the wrong lane, you go off to Astoria. If you get into the other wrong lane, you go to Beaverton or something, thinking that that's what they were referring to, not understanding that over the last 20 plus years, Portland had turned into this temporal shimmering gateway that if you take the wrong turn, you actually go to hell. And here's the thing. It took me just about 2 hours. It was like 1 hour and 58 minutes or something to transit 29 miles to get out of Portland in this stop and go traffic. And I was unaware that that's what everybody was talking about, was this incredible traffic bouchon and bollocks state. It's all pear-shaped down there, and there's no hope of it ever being rectified. So the situation that I thought was the cause is entirely not it. It was quite the terrible trip. I was so taxed by it when I got back here that Kathy almost took me to the hospital, and I would have been too weak to resist.
Well, I'm a little surprised because I thought hell was, I don't know, places like the Silicon Valley or maybe Redmond.
Well,
at least personal representatives of hell are there all over the place.
I ran into one down in Central Oregon, too, let me tell you. It was an interesting kind of an experience. But weird meander. But I grant you
but you made it back
chillier parts of hell are indeed in
or whatever, right?
And they've got them nicely air conditioned in 32 buildings now.
Sounds like hell. Anyway, I'm in a different part of hell over here in Tokyo. Lots of stuff in the air and all that kind of thing. By the way, I like to feed the birds a little bit, and this summer we've got a little bird with an extra toe. So I don't know if that's a common thing or not, but Perhaps it's the radiation. What about in your neck of the woods?
We're seeing some small levels of distortions here and there. Not really like that. That is actually beyond atypical in terms of birds. Their DNA is relatively stable. You don't get a whole lot of spontaneous mutation or throwback in birds unless they've been deliberately bred. You know, some of the strangely bred chickens can throw back a generation. So that's probably a pretty significant indicator. Our problem here has been, again, well, it's actually affects us on perhaps three different levels. All of the people that I know that are in their 40s that were in the extreme exploring sports kind of business, and they'd go up above 6,500 feet. A lot of them are very ill, and they many of them refuse to accept the idea that it could be radiation poisoning because of their pastime. It's just rather odd. It's sort of like not a cancer cluster because they don't yet have cancer. Not a lot of them have been diagnosed that way. But it's just curious that my small circle which includes a number of these individuals. Don't get me wrong. I just happen to know a lot who are in the fire and the search and rescue, that kind of thing. But because of that concentrated knowledge, but not being part of it, I can see it from a couple of different angles. And there have been a number of those individuals that have gotten ill. And that's rather worrisome. But we've also seen effects on local biosphere from fish and everything from elk and moose and bear reports in Alaska. Now, we've seen some reports of the bears with what appear to be radiation spot poisoning in northern British Columbia, but it doesn't seem to have really moved much further south than, say, about 200 kilometers, north of Broughton Sound, so about midway up the British Columbia, the length of it. From there north in Alaska, a lot of concentration. Down here, we actually had a whole series of reports and people testing the water. And so we know that the rainfall, to a certain extent, has saved our butts because it washes a lot of the radioactive pollutants, which are heavy metals, into the Puget Sound. And because Puget Sound has what's known as a positive drainage effect, stuff on the bottom works its way out. Unlike places like the Mediterranean, where stuff on the bottom stays in a form of a sediment because of the giant lip that's formed across from Gibraltar to Africa. Here we have it all spill out into the continental shelf up around the Straits of Juan de Fuca. So they've seen reduction in radiation in the last, you see that study came out and I was reading it in June and it was from about 2 months earlier. So in this last year plus 3 months or so about 15 months, we've seen the radiation levels fall significantly in the coastal population of mollusks and seals and octopus and this kind of thing, and even in local crab populations. And that's rather remarkable because crabs and some of the other native creatures like the geoduck and the oysters have a tendency to concentrate at being sort of sewer eaters. But in this case, we're seeing that the current generations have less radiation than those two back that were tested. So that's been kind of a good bit of news. But the radiation storm, insofar as the ocean part of it is concerned, really appears to be hitting Northern California and heading in points south. I've got some friends of mine that live in a hilly area and it's actually sort of southern Northern California. It's like right at the bending area there. And they've got a radiation levels in their water off the coast. This man and his female companion there are both surfers, and they had the foresight to take a Geiger counter some years back, back when they moved there, and they've been able to do some water samples, and their water levels vary very widely depending on what's going on. In about 2 to 3 weeks after a big release, they'll get hit by a big surge in the radiation in their area, and they've seen effects in local wildlife in terms of seals and so on. We've had die-offs here recently in local wildlife, aquatic wildlife, but I don't know whether to put it down to radiation or not. We've got wasting disease in the elk and so on, locally in the Hood Canal area in the Olympic Forest and this kind of a deal. But I don't know whether it's aluminum poisoning or whether it's radiation. Those bear and moose and so on that we know have had radiation poisoning, we've seen photos of. It's quite clear it's a spot. It's they've literally got a piece of strontium or cesium or something on their fur that creates one of those ionized radiation ulcers that are quite distinct and different from the wasting disease. So, but other than that, I don't know of any local effects. We haven't had the tomatoes with the strange growths yet, that sort of a thing.
Well, I've got one comment. I was in Portland a bit this summer, and I'm familiar with the area, and there was a real dramatic decline in small birds and squirrels compared to past years. I don't know
which
if that's
kind of squirrels. The native, little red natives, what's known as a brown squirrel, or the gray invaders?
Well, it was the little ones I'm used to.
See, here's our situation. About 15, 20 years ago, the big fat gray squirrels from the East Coast got established here in my little peninsula. And they pretty much have devastated, outcompeted the population of the little brown squirrels that were native here. I always liked the little brown squirrels for a lot of different reasons. They'd sit up there and give you sass, and they were nice little guys. But they were just absolutely devastated, probably down to maybe 1/100th of what their population had been prior to the invasion. And that state persisted for a number of years. And that changed radically this year. I have yet to see, I think I've seen 2 of the big gray squirrels, but there's been a resurgence of the activities of the small brown squirrels. They're back again in numbers I haven't seen before. Small numbers, but they still outnumber the big gray squirrels. But the big gray squirrels, their population is down, I would have to just guesstimate, but it's down maybe far less than a quarter of what it was 2 years ago in terms of the number that we see around here. And it's, people around here are hungry, but they're not that hungry yet. So I don't think it's a natural predation or anything along those lines. They are not around, though. I would agree that that is the case. The small bird population, if they're talking about the finch class of birds, that's the case. We've also had, for the first time this year, we saw a single blue jay. These are not the nice blue jays you get on the East Coast. These are these squawking stellar jays that just raise hell. They, again, used to dominate. They're an invasive species, and they dominated for a number of years, and they're gone, and this is not part of a natural decline. You can watch species rise and fall over the course of like 5 and 6 years in your local area, just as the natural balance of things works its way back and forth. But this decline is quite odd, so I would agree with that. We've had a decrease in the small bird population, not noticeably in things like crows, ravens, not even in hummingbirds. They've seemed to thrive. But the small birds, the finches, the ground scratchers, this kind of thing are definitely off. But what's the cause? That's the issue. Could have been harp. We were just being baked by harp for months along this coast.
Well, I haven't got a clue. I know that a couple months ago, my wife and I went to Vancouver, Canada, and we both had kind of heart pains, which we hadn't had before. So that's a bit of a, and it was raining every day. It was a nice, beautiful summer by the standards in that part of the world, right? It's June, but only if you think it is, or something like that.
Yes, right.
But anyway, I don't know. It's just one of those kind of things. But I guess we just have these mysteries, and we can't really be sure. By the way, I have a question. Do you have any thoughts on radiation abatement? Is there anything people can do to...
There's a lot of things you can do for the ionizing aspects of it. If you happen to get some particulates in you, you can get rid of some of them some ways and others other ways. But for instance, it's good to dump the sea salt and go back to iodine supplemented salt. This way you don't have your thyroid hungry for the stuff, and so it won't have a tendency to get the radioactive variety out of your environment. You can drink lemon balm tea. The plant name is Melissa. It's an herb, and it has tendency to cause a flushing effect of radiation. If you're older and you're into tonics and you need the adaptogens, you can drink Shazandra, which is it's the five tastes. Take it as a tea rather than a supplement because it actually needs to work on your tongue in order to be partially effective. But it helps with flushing of the effects of ionizing radiation out of your system. I investigated some of the others, some of the Ayurvedics, like ashwagandha, which is great for the inflammation and that kind of stuff. And I loved it as an aspirin substitute for that effect. But it doesn't actually cause the flushing process to continue through the liver. It just abates it temporarily and keeps it recirculating. So the Shazandra would be a better approach for those people that are over, say, 45 or so. But the lemon balm tea will keep everybody quite calm because that's one of its side effects is it makes you very calm. It's nice stuff. They actually, as part of your contract as a subcontractor in some of the radiation zones, you have to sign a thing saying you'll drink at least 2 cups of this stuff for a total of 12 ounces of a certain concentration of lemon balm tea every day because of its known effectiveness against the ionizing effect of radiation on the skin, the eyes, the cilia in the nose, ears, lungs, etc. So I think very highly of that stuff. And then it would depend on whether one thought they were exposed to particulates and had ingested them as to whether there would be any point to doing anything else. There's no point to doing, say, for an instance, an intestinal scrub or purge or any of those kind of things, anything harsh. Unless you knew or had reason to suspect that you'd ingested strontium or cesium or some of the longer-lived heavy elements. And then you actually can take effective remedies in the form of, the particular kinds of clay that are known to attract radioactive particulates out of the intestine and this kind of deal. But all of these are going to be irritants rather than homogeneous or harmonious with the body, because they must necessarily try and make the body work harder to rid itself of these particles. So just be advised that if someone tells you, oh, here's a nice thing that'll help your liver get rid of any potential ingested cesium or strontium, well, be advised it's going to make your liver work really hard and your gallbladder as well, and will probably cause some intestinal effects along the way. And it may not feel good for a while. So really, why put yourself at risk to that sort of thing unless you're pretty sure you've ingested a particle or at least have been exposed to them?
Okay, so Cliff, I wanted to ask you about, you were talking about clays. What about like zeolite, which is supposed to, because of the structure that it has, kind of attract the radiation?
Yeah, that's actually I've actually got some of that stuff. At one point in my early days as a lab assistant on the East Coast when I was in oceanography, we had occasion to deal with radioactive isotopes. And we were actually given zeolite and this other, I can't think of the name of it now, a French clay to ingest. And it was because we were handling the stuff. We were young, and they assumed we were stupid. They were probably correct, and so they made us do this as a precaution. Let me tell you, though, as a regimen, it is not a nice thing, and it does stress the body. So sitting here, I don't think there's any problem that I would take it, but I've got it here just in case. And there are ways to tell if we're dealing with particulates. We actually had that situation in the very early days after the Fukushima disaster where we had products show up here that were affected. I mean, milk products and that kind of thing, where you'd be able to see the radioactive particle move about in the container by turning the container upside down and following the track with the wand on the nuclear meter. So yeah, under those circumstances, we actually had particulates in the air as opposed to just the effect of the ionizing radiation to deal with. And wow. It would have been a good deal then, but I didn't have it.
Well, let me ask you then about brown algae, because that's supposed to be something else that's also good. And I don't know, but I haven't had no experience with it really. Just
you mean like sea vegetables?
Yeah, sea vegetables.
Well, of course, sea vegetables are going to be a big whammy for you because, they've got to be harvested correctly in any case, the kind of kelp and so on. But they're going to be loaded with radioactivity along the West Coast. So I wouldn't advise eating any of them until we're quite sure that the crisis is past, which might be a number of years. Unfortunately, that's the case because they're grown here. If they're anywhere, most of the harvest by the sea vegetables for a lot of the areas of Japan and Korea and all of this has been the Gulf of Alaska because the waters are so cold and so pure. You get the various different kinds of kelp that would grow phenomenal lengths because of the purity of the water and the mineral sources and so on. But now these days they're also tainted with radiation. A number of people I know that used to do the terrible job of putting on wetsuits and going on out there with hooks and crawling over the rocks and all of this kind of thing to do the harvest. And that's why it was so well paid, was it's just so gruesome to do. And they're out of work because the Japanese aren't buying from this area anymore.
Oh, really? So what about fish?
Okay, we've seen some of the fish studies here. I don't know how much of the information I'm getting is either the whole picture or how accurate it is, because there's real clampdown on information coming out about the studies being done on salmon and some of the other fish, especially the bottom feeders, the cod, the true cod, the ling cod, halibut, flounder, this kind of thing. But the populations were very radioactive as little as 18 months ago. The issue now is not so much concentrated on us, I think, as it is on differing species in southern Oregon down through Mexico, just because of how the flow seems to have changed in the mainstream from Fukushima. There's not this direct stream into Alaskan waters the way there were. There is the counterflow along the coast that runs north that will eventually take any heavy particles that drift down out of the pelagic zone in towards the abysmal zones will eventually hit a current that will take them north. And so the heavy particles will tend to creep up into Alaska, but the circulation level might be on the order of decades. There's just no way of knowing. At the moment, it appears as though the radiation levels are somewhat off in the transitory species like salmon and this kind of thing, but are still up in the longer-lived halibut that are being brought up. But it may be simply that the halibut simply ingested the stuff a while back and for whatever reason are still able to persist and live. But one thing that I will note is that a lot of the biologists that I know that work for the local agencies here are reporting a huge increase in the number of cancers they're seeing in the sample fish.
Oh, wow.
For whatever reason, whatever cause. We can't say it's necessarily radiation. It might be industrial pollutants, who knows. But I was told that the cancer rate, which had been when I was working for the same agency, let me see, that would have been 86 and 87. In a study, the cancer rates we were looking at were about on the order of noted cancers that you'd see in these casual kind of scans as they were doing things like extracting eggs and this sort of thing. Were about 8 per 100. And now it's about 60 per 100. So
wow,
fivefold.
That's a big rise.
Yeah, a minimum of a fivefold increase, statistically stable. Beyond that, they're seeing, as I say, a significant 60% of the fish are showing cancers, whereas before it was basically, insofar as they could see, about 8%. They've also noticed a number of other anomalies, but again, they can't put that down to radiation because there's just so much else going on.
Well, but the bottom line might be that it's really not a good idea to eat a lot of fish from the Pacific Ocean.
I would say that that's a given, yeah. And farm fish, of course, are no better, so.
Right. What about the farming from, the Atlantic Ocean?
They've got, there's, in terms of radiation, there isn't much in the way of other issues, but of course, the species are different, the water temperatures are different, and so on. And it's only a matter of time before there's something that's going to go on in the Atlantic in any event. Plus, there's still the same issue beyond radiation, which is the tendency of fish to concentrate industrial pollutants of all kinds in their flesh. So mercury, et cetera, PCBs, the pseudoestrogens that are coming out of the plastic into the ocean. They're finding a lot of those in the salmon and so on. So the cancers can be explained from chemical viewpoints. That same condition would be true of farm fish and other fish from other oceans, simply because they're all pretty much in the same state. The Pacific more so, simply because of the radiation. A lot of the things now, for instance, I'm a vegetarian anyway, but if I were after the fish oil effect I think, as a health regimen kind of thing, I would concentrate on flax oil seed or hemp seed to achieve it, because the omega-3 issue, while it's vital to you, it's a huge risk to take on mercury and these industrial toxins because you're at the top of the food chain.
Right.
And some of these concentrate, it's this inverse pyramid kind of thing, right? The whale eats bazillions of krill, and so if an individual krill is poison, it's no big deal. But if bazillions of krill are each small items of poison that doesn't affect them, it may concentrate and kill the whale. And that's kind of where we're at. The concentration of industrial pollutants is climbing the food chain fairly high. And now we even have, as I posted on the site, the ultimate apparent toxin or pollutant, which would be the Morgellons they're finding in chicken McNuggets.
You're kidding. I haven't heard that.
There's a link off my site. The photos seem rather telling and revealing to me, and I see no reason to think it's a hoax. The linguistics don't seem to show any indication that they're trying to pull anything off.
Wow. So really and truly, the food that's available for people to eat is at risk. It seems like the fish is at risk. I've heard that beef has a certain amount of radiations, or people are buying beef from Japan that they shouldn't be buying, and that, I don't know. I guess we'll all be vegetarians.
That's actually not a bad idea in any event, simply for health. If you're an effective vegetarian, if you do it well and you overcome the issues, you can outlive yourself as a meat eater significantly and healthier, and be healthier longer. The issues for all of us are that the food body is indeed polluted. The pollution, to me, seems too egregious to simply be natural tendencies of crony capitalism run amok. If indeed it is the case of a system run amok, then in my view, we need to destroy that system, because we all live on the food body and we don't ever eat dollars. And so if it's that kind of a system that's forced us into this bad food situation, which need not exist, then we just need to chuck the system and start over again, because the food body is so important. But
hey, Clif,
yeah.
Have you got any thoughts on whether Fukushima then, the response is really pathetic. Does this look like it's just part of that intentionally destroying things agenda?
I think so. It's really screwy. That and the BP oil spill, right? Both of those took out major water bodies. They damaged major ecosystems almost in a targeted way. It's because the lack of response. Basically you have to ask yourself: is the Japanese nation, are they stupid? Are they more stupid than the Russians? Look how the response differs from Chernobyl. And if so, well, are they so stupid they're not going to ask for help? Everything seems to point to deliberate acts of hands off, let the thing boil away into the ocean. We want it to do that. If you were going to plan an attack on the Pacific Ocean, that would have been the ideal thing to do, would have been to cause a radiation episode there, or from that point north into the Kamchatka Peninsula. And since there aren't any nuke plants in that area, this is the first opportunity they had because of the currents. Just as the best place to cause problems for the Gulf was right at the point of the confluence of the plates, as well as the stream flow from the Mississippi. And that they're still allowing that to go on. And just the other day, the executive orders making journalism in the Gulf, reporting on the death by Corexit, all of that kind of stuff, making it a crime. And, it's just getting really crazy. It looks as though, from an outside viewpoint, in the sense of, an interested observer, but attempting to be objective, that this is not mere stupidity. We've seen stupidity on the order of the perfected in things like the Three Stooges, where they actually are attempting to make it to the point where it becomes humorously funny. And we've we've passed through that with the Gulf of Mexico issues and the way they theoretically were going to deal with those, as well as the nuclear meltdown issues in northern Japan. It strikes me as being beyond stupid in terms of how they are handling this, deliberately obtuse, beyond the system itself. And I've met politicians, and they're really dumb, but they're usually scared rabbits and would go with reasonably good advice. And they've had some reasonably good advice about all of these things, at least, do something, boron, etc. And they're not doing any of it. So it's this hands-off policy leads me to question everybody's motives.
I got a point or two on that. One is, they're taking the debris and burning it, and a lot of it they're not using filters on, the stuff that's directly on the coast. In other words, if they burn it in a city, they filter it. But if they don't filter it. So it comes directly to North America with the worst of the worst in it. So that's intentional. I got one other thing. In 2007, in Niigata, Japan had two very large earthquakes in 2 days, and one of them was almost directly under the biggest power generating nuclear plant, and it got taken down, and it may have actually leaked. We don't know. It was really a hush-up kind of thing. And so when you look at this, it starts to look a little bit more than accidental. Can't prove it, but
yeah, but let's just say that we're Buddhists and we don't believe in the concept of meaningless coincidence. And so it's coincidental that in 2007 is 2 years after the very large military buildup in the Pacific that has been mainly silent in the sense that the military allows that this is occurring, but they say it's all just normal training exercises and so on. And it's also 2 years after the military had in their hands at least 3 of the corpse of the mermen. So really kind of an interesting situation. All of these, by the way, came from the Pacific. So if we were to say that, maybe there were coincident things going on at that time, it sort of makes sense. I'm convinced there's a war going on at a couple of levels between the breakaway civilization, and I define that a little bit more radically than, say, Catherine Austin Fitts, because my version of the breakaway civilization is not merely the New World Order so much as it is all of the guys out in space that are sucking calories away from the planet. But they're at war with someone out there. Now I think they're also at war with someone down here, and in some way there's either a direct or a proxy battle with our United States Navy involved in, let's say, a coordinating approach to it. We have some interesting juxtaposition of naval bases here along the inland waters of Puget Sound and Hood Canal, and there have been just some weird things going on in these past few years that the Navy just would prefer that no one really discuss. And a lot of it seems to be going towards the idea of them fighting or dealing with aquatic enemies. So that being the case, it doesn't strike me as irrational an approach from their viewpoint to want to nuke the Pacific if they thought that the bottom of it was crawling with all of these people that were potentially their enemies, and that they had no real other way of effectively combating.
Cliff, can you talk a little bit about the Mermens?
Yeah, there's a lot of confusion in terms of my thinking on it as to where they may sit within terrestrial history as well as our own genetic structures. Not that genes are necessarily a precursor or necessarily the end-all and be-all of inheritance, but the mermen may be cousins. We don't know. They could be cousins. There's something to suggest this in the description of how the Dogon maintain the myth or the stories of the Nummo. and what the Nummo had been, what they had done, how they'd screwed up, and how they intended to rectify it. And there's a few things about the mermen that we have to acknowledge. That, like UFO, the concept of mermen or mer people go back as far as humans go back in terms of our recorded history. We'll note that they are an essential part and parcel of our human history for everybody who's ever had anything to do with the sea at any level. That is to say, any latitudinal level around the planet. Polar people have merman imagery as well as equatorial peoples. And they don't vary that much, except that, there's, in the more recent years, there's been a tendency to make them, the mermen appear to be more mythological and a lot prettier than their previous descriptions from ancient times. And the recent times, they've gotten to the point where they say, those old descriptions of the mermen being ugly beasties really were people that were, stupid Spaniards, uneducated, and they were confused by the manatee and the dugong in the New World and thought these were, in fact, mermaids because they vaguely resembled such a being. And it's like, no, I don't think so. If you go to the Norse people and you look at their drawings and stuff, and you go up to some of the people in Alaska, the natives along the coast of BC, and you look at some of these horrific amphibian beings, they're right out of the Dogon playbook, their textbook. They're right out of the Dogon religion in terms of the description of the amphibian that breeds us all. And they're also very similar to the description of the mermen that are appearing now. There's some significant differences, though, that would make me think that these are not the Nummo themselves that are appearing, but the mermen are perhaps our cousins. Maybe they're intended to be.
Cliff, you back?
I'm back. Yep.
Okay.
Those mermen are awfully frightening if they can pull this off.
Or somebody's scared of him.
So you were talking about the different cultures, how they look at mermens, or how they have.
Yeah, and the Norse have, if you look at the Salish description of the amphibian, the mother frog, it's a picture that's right out of the Mali descriptions for the Nummo, the Dogon people. It's really similar, excepting in the ears for the Finnish and the Swedes for some of their myths of these amphibian creatures. And then, separate from all of these guys, there are all of the mermen, and they all share certain characteristics that are different from the Nummo. And so I actually think that what we're looking at is a different species than the Nummo, but related to ourselves, perhaps through the Nummo, and may, as I was saying when we were cut off, maybe even our replacements. If indeed the planet was to encounter something horrific like something beyond an ice age, like the idea of a planet X comes on through and snatches our atmosphere, that kind of thing, then what better place to weather it, so to speak, than in the oceans?
Well, here in Ireland and in Scotland, a lot of the Silky legends, particularly in fishing areas, are about beings that come out of the sea and have children with people, and their entire families who believe themselves descended from these matches, and often they have webbed feet and webbed toes. So,
they're not alone.
But it's very interesting.
Also, of course, that's the whole basis, really, for the claim of divine right to rule by the British Crown, is that they swear in this weird ceremony as they induct each of their generational members into it, that to honor the memory of their ancestor, the sea monster, that was born from the union of two males, one of whom who turned female for the occasion and gave birth to this sea monster. And that's from whence all of the claims for the Windsor of today for their crown come, is from this claim of this particular association by right of birth through that particular sea monster breeding with humans. So it's rather.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah, and they've got this stone somewhere in Wales in this castle, and they all truck on down there and do incantations and skip around nude or some damn thing. And but in the meantime, there's this intense ceremony with each generation telling the previous or the next generation to follow exactly where their source of power comes from. And that is the Merovingian roots. If you go in and look at the derivation of the word, the name, and actually all of the derivative names all go back to the idea of a sea monster, but also the myth of all of the royalty associated with them all go back to this particular sea monster, which was the union of these two males. And see, that's the Nummo myth encapsulated in just a pristine little element, because the Dogon tell us that the Nummo had 8 ancestors. Now, the Nummo are all female, but occasionally some of them will become male when they need to create new bodies. And they are immortal and eternal in ways that we are not. We're eternal, but we're not immortal. They are both, but they're not immortal in the same body. Their consciousness knowingly goes from body to body. And they sort of wanted to provide us with that, and they sort of screwed up. But one of the myths of the Nummo is that the 8 ancestors of humanity were, okay, well, the Nummo came to the planet Earth. They were going to do some cool stuff. They were genetic masters, so they thought. They're an aquatic being. And they started monkeying about with the things that they saw here and create here. And they created the first generation of, you might think of as terrestrial hominids. And this being that they created was neither eternal nor immortal. And when it discovered this fact, it went absolutely crazy and stole one of the Nummo's spaceships, and not knowing how to fly it, flew out of the atmosphere and came back and crashed into the planet and created an ecological disaster that was catastrophic to the planet as a whole. The reason that this occurs is it has to do with the way the Nummo travel through interstellar space is similar to the way that a star travels through interstellar space, only they're employing a thing that they call liquid copper, and they're basically vaporizing the space ahead of them and going into the vacuum that they create. Tremendous amount of power involved. In any event, though, it polluted the planet and led to the situation where the Nummo had to get their bug out bag, which included our DNA, and skip back home. These guys are sort of wandering universe colonizers, and they were on their way to from Sirius to the Pleiades. They were having problems with the death of certain stars and conditions changing in Sirius, but they went back there because of the disaster that had been created here. And then they sent ships back to the Earth to start the cleanup process, and it is from there that we get all of the flood myths, because the Dogon describe exactly the technical process by which the planet was scrubbed of the pollutants, and it was a giant flood, an all-encompassing flood of these chemicals that came in and basically sought out the pollutants that had been put in by the crash of the spaceship. And a few beings of all different kinds survived that process, were not killed by it, and there was a native, if you will, a native DNA base for the subsequent process, which was when the Nummo came back to repopulate the planet. And it is from there that we get the 7 days of creation and all of that, because the Nummo came back with all of this DNA information that they'd previously taken away. And the Dogon described the Nummo and their DNA information in a very interesting way, because the Dogon people were quite insistent that no, it took up absolutely no space whatsoever to have all of the creatures of all of terrestrial life aboard the Nummo ship. And when questioned by it in the 1930s, the Dogon described digital cubicle storage in basically crystalline matrices of all of this incredible information, because they were saying basically you didn't need the creature, all you needed was its DNA, but they didn't have the terminology to describe it effectively. But the descriptions are characteristic of what we now know to be digital storage of DNA information, which of course is infinitely compressible and could be held in a small cube that one could hold in the palm of their hand, and you could have all the DNA information stored about all the creatures on the planet if you knew how to effectively store and retrieve it. And here they were describing this in 1930s to basically wonderstruck Frenchmen and Germans who were saying, huh? And then we now have that situation where we realize, the Dogon's myth is describing a highly technical species that came here and mucked about with all of our DNA. And if you look at the history in Sanskrit, if you look at it in the Maori languages, if you look at it all across the Pacific islands, all the way up into the Alaska regions, all the way down into the Salish people, the many different kinds of Salish people, all the way down into California, etc., you find a substrate of myths that also match all the Dogon around this particular character called Changer. And Changer is this aquatic frog-like being that could hold all of life in its mouth. And its mouth is described in a way that replicates the Dogon's description of this digital cube. And so you see that it all interconnects, and maybe man is not alone in its feeling, in our feeling of being out of touch with nature. And maybe there's a real reason we have this core in our being, especially in some races more than others. Because you have to go into the real detail of the Nemo myth as to why the red men and the black men and the green men and the blue men and the white men and etc. were all developed different characteristics and relationships with the universe around us. But my idea is that there's so much life that has been altered by Changer that, for instance, if otter and raven and some of these other creatures were able to voice it, maybe they would say, we too feel, even as intricate as we are within the natural world, out of touch with nature itself, because we are all engineered. And we may share that in common with a number of creatures, because in our myths, or in the Salish myths up here in the Pacific Northwest, Raven shares with us a wry sense of humor. Raven is very smart, and Raven knows that Raven is now different, accepts that it's different and what it is, but at a certain level resents not knowing what it was before, and not knowing about who it was and that kind of thing, and knows that Changer changed it forever. And that, so our relationship with Changer is very multifaceted, because there is this level of unresolved emotions that we as terrestrial beings, not just, at least we're anthropomorphizing and putting onto Raven these feelings. We don't know that the bird themselves feel that way, but the characterizations within the Salish description of Raven and some of the other animals are as though the same thing being expressed by humans, that, we know we have been made different by these beings. And to a certain extent, it would have been nice to know what we were like before Changer changed us. But of course, that's impossible, because the nature of the planet had to, it was so horrific that everything had to change in order to be able to be accommodated in new forms after the horrific accident that took place here. And we all existed outside Earth, if you will, in the form of our 8 ancestors for some period of time during the reclamation of the planet. But then they bring it back in the Dogon myths, and the 8 ancestors start reintegrating with the life forms that are here, the DNA and stuff that is here, and we end up with the complexities that is essentially is modern life. But I think that our feeling, to a certain extent, of feeling out of place in nature, the familiar theme of the 17 and 1800s, as man sought to, quote, conquer, at least Western man did, to conquer the planet and so on, and civilize it. Not necessarily a good thing, but as they sought to do that, there was always man against nature, in this subtext of us not really being harmoniously part of this planet, which is quite evident. We are very inharmonious in everything we do, and we're not proceeding in an effective management way. And there's a real good explanation for it at that level. Now, there is something within the Dogon myth that said, basically, when y'all get ready, we'll be back and show you the next step. Or when y'all screw it up royally, we'll be back with your replacement. So, here we are. Maybe the Dogon are coming back, and this new form of the mermen could indeed be the Dogon. We don't know. They don't necessarily have to maintain the same shape over the millennia just to suit our needs. They could come back in some other form. Or it could be our replacement, because, as I say, the oceans are a good place to survive all of this, as long as they're not being polluted by us guys up here.
Cliff, have you ever heard of the rock band, the Mermen?
No. No, I'm sorry. I'm woefully ignorant of things like pop culture.
Modern culture. Well, it's probably a little old by now, but there was a very popular band in California called the Mermen. They were surfers, very serious surfers.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Now you're explaining to me. They had esoteric thoughts. They weren't just partying surfers. Um, well, this is fascinating stuff. I mean, the question though is, how could one learn more about it? I mean, how would we know? I mean, you speculated there might be a war going on. Um, you think that might be part of the things like
There,
sonar and other things?
there's a lot of evidence that the Navy is and has developed lethal concentrated forms of sound in the water that could be thought of in a way of like pulsed lasers. It's sort of a pulsed maser, actually, molecular movement as opposed to sound per se. They're just trying to generate a force wave that travels and causes all these molecules to crash into each other. But it's not for communication purposes, and the fact that it is killing particular species, even though they always apologize afterwards. Oh, sorry, we didn't mean to kill 144 porpoise, and all these dolphins and those 10 whales. We were really only after the 5 people we're not going to tell you about. That kind of thing doesn't make sense in a kind of a planet that we had described. So here's our problem. If you're in the conspiracy theory thinking world, you find yourself running into the dual mindsets that exist everywhere. And you have to exist in both worlds simultaneously, because you have to say to yourself, the US military does weird ass shit all the time. Just because, for instance, sometimes just simply for corruption. There's a company that knows they can make money producing or they think a weapon that sounds really cool. They write up the idea, they get everybody to lobby it. Some colonel thinks he's going to get a generalship out of it and then retire to this company, and there you go. Here, the company gets a couple of $1 million, and they're off producing this weird-ass weapon. So that stuff does happen simply because of the nature of the organizations that we have around us. But at the same time, there's a level of direction that goes on at a higher level as to decides what areas they investigate and put more money into than others. So if you follow the money, so to speak, and say, show me the money, where are we spending the bucks that at least you're willing to talk about, there's a lot of things that they're buying that only make sense if you're dealing with an aquatic enemy that does not share a similar biological, how do I want to say it, vulnerability. So in other words, the stuff they're doing now, pulsed sound weapons, don't do a whole lot to submarines. And in fact, we've got a lot of submarines down there looking at these things these weapons being demonstrated when it happens, the same way we used to have people up here in trucks watching the atomic bombs go off when they happened. So we know that they're not affecting the gear that we have. So who do we intend for them to affect? If you look at the evidence of who they are affecting, it's the soft-bodied life forms that have emulsified oil brains. Like ourselves, only in an aquatic state. And it's like, as far as we're officially told, that would mean we're at war with dolphins and porpoise and manatee, dugong, whales, and potentially, because of their body types, some of the octopi.
Juliet, Charlie, end of message. Repeat.
This smacks to me of something deliberately being done.
Yeah, this all feels deliberate to me, but hey. Dan, you want me to pick it up where?
Let's talk about time for a while.
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah,
Let's just. So, Cliff, let's move on to a topic of note lately, which is time. What is this thing? It's a long topic. I was thinking, the other day of watching Time Bandits. In there where they say, "Don't touch that; it's evil," like there's an evil particle. So I'm kind of wondering, do you think there's a time particle? What is time?
My understanding of time, there's not a particle. There's a time impulse, though. This is measured
like a frequency?
No, it isn't that so much. The Sanskrit, the yogic description is that time is merely one of the 66,000 attributes of reality. and that it expresses itself in combination with the other 66,000 attributes. And because there is this blending, that's why time doesn't feel the same, or any of the attributes never feel the same, and that's why they don't have constancy, is because not all of them are manifesting at the same time, and when they do, their interaction is multiplicitous in terms of its modification on each other. So in other words, a green of an apple tree will be that particular green this year, but it'll never be that particular green again, simply because the attributes that we'll be expressing the next time it's green are going to be different than the ones that are there now, and that includes the attribute of time. But time itself is, insofar as the Sanskrit or yogic understanding, is itself modified by those elements around it, as we all know, and you can actually experience this yourself. I've been in situations in which time stood still for me because of the situation at the time, the emotional impact or impetus. Usually these are life-threatening, when people's lives are at risk and disastrous kind of things happen, and time shifts, or your consciousness relative to time shifts. The perception of it is entirely different than any other period in your life that doesn't share these similar characteristics. And so the time has a qualitative difference under those circumstances, and if not a noticeable quantitative difference. And you'll find that the quantitative difference is expressed by different minds. So for instance, some of these might be giant earthquakes are going on, some people are frozen, and they will not ever really react appropriately. Some others are frozen until you jar them out of it and shake their awareness back to a refocus on their perception of reality around them. Other people are built genetically to notice that, oh, time shifted, I've got to shift along with it, and they think faster or whatever the circumstances. And so you see that there's actually a different way in which minds perceive these commonly shared temporal shift events. The planet also can, in terms of humanity, can share these events. And we've seen time altered by large enough temporal experiments in the form of, the stuff that Art Bell used to do, but also in those kind of experiments, if you will, where the universe intrudes, and it can intrude in horrific ways. And but you have that sense of time standing still or slowing down for the events that occur, like a JFK assassination. Now, I was in Europe at the time, and it was nonetheless a qualitative and quantitatively different period that we shared with the United States. Now, a lot of this, of course, is thanks to modern communications. And so it begs the issue of, does time exist at that level as a result of the shared connection of consciousness? Which, of course, I think it does. Make sense?
Okay, so you were saying that conscious time might not exist outside of consciousness. Is that what you said?
It's certainly impacted by it. Consciousness is a collection of these attributes, and it does impact time. I know this. I can experience it myself when I meditate. In that sense, you can easily spend 10 minutes in meditation that actually turn out to be 3 hours. And the perception is you're absolutely sure virtually no time has passed. And it's that same perception that you get from these really deep sleeps, where you sometimes wake up in just the perfect frame of mind to wonder, is it night or is it day? Has time passed at all? And under those circumstances, it is your perception of the time that is paramount in your mind. Bear in mind, we're creatures of our 5 senses, or 6 or 7 or 8, or however many you actually admit that we may have. But our senses, nonetheless, that are input streams into our brain, which then interrelates with our mind. So to a certain weird sense, does anything exist outside of that input stream? Time might be entirely as illusionary as anything else, because we're dealing with our decoding of that input stream within our brains to make sense of it. And so you have to get to the ultimate level of discussion and build back up, which all the philosophers did, what exists, what is existence, etc. Are we both looking at the same object at the same moment and seeing something similar enough that we could say it's the same? And from that point on, you can say, okay, then you're getting into something that's a little bit more solidly connected between our consciousnesses, in the sense that we're both seeing this plant, it's both moving back, we're both seeing it move back and forth in the wind, and we say, okay, we're both perceiving that at the same moment. Now, then it gets really weird, because how I perceive time at that moment will be flavored by the hormones in my system, by the age, by the amount of energy I'm getting from the sun, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, as will anybody I'm also sharing that moment with. So in that sense, our common understanding of time is tenuous at best. In that sense, that's why I think the Greeks have the concept of chronos separated from the experiences of the experiencer version of time. And that really makes a lot of sense to discuss it that way.
So that time, as in the chronos way of looking at it, is digital. It's
mechanistic.
It's discrete.
There you go.
And you can measure it, as you can measure space and frequency, right? But consciousness, and consciousness is more continuous than you would say, or it's the perception of time and space and frequency by a consciousness or conscious person is varied by their who they are or what their experience is, but that's a continuous sort of experience. I guess what I'm trying to do is say that some things are measurable and discrete, and some things are fluid, and that consciousness is fluid. I mean, right. I understand the whole thing about the experience of time.
Right, but we also have to understand that our consciousness is what is doing. I don't want to get too diverted. Here's the problem. Because my mind instantly jumps to this. It's like, yeah, but let's not forget, it's our consciousness, of course, is what we're using to measure things. And thus, every one of our measurements must, in my opinion, be assumed to be wonky from the beginning. You can't trust any numbers we've ever come up with as a species, because we're doing this all through the media of our consciousness. Making these assumptions about the things it's measuring and so on. And repeatedly now we find that even science coming out and saying, oh, geez, radioactivity decay is not a constant. It's now they say, oh, it's being changed by the sun. And I would say, well, guys, okay, that's fine. Let's not put a why on it. Let's just acknowledge radioactivity decay is not a constant and go from there, because it may always have been not a constant. And you guys may have just been assholes in the past thinking it was. And now you're looking around for some big excuse as to why it's changed. And so by assuming that, or by assigning a value to that, the answering the why question, we get off into an area that really isn't pertinent and may not be true to begin with.
Well, maybe we're living in a hologram. So
no, we know we are.
Age.
Or maybe they're getting more discrete, more exact ways to measure things, and what they couldn't see it before because they didn't have the technology.
But then there's also the risk of that, okay? Because look, here we've spent more money than ever before on a single wild ass idea, which is this CERN thing. And what we're doing there is we're hunting for this level of particulate pre-matter that may not even exist and is entirely illusionary, even if we find it and name it repeatedly, because it can be argued that the number of discrete particles is as infinite as our minds are willing to hunt them down. As long as we're willing to look for these various combinations of the 66,000 attributes that are going to appear in reality in combination with each other, 66,000 combinatorically, is going to keep you looking a long damn time at basically the same particle that says, well, geez, guys, sure, I'll show you a different color this time, but I'm the same particle. So, are we learning anything from this huge amount of effort into ultimate reductionism? That argument, I don't think, really stands if you look at all of our measurements as being wonky to begin with.
And is it actionable?
Correct, exactly. What good does it do? And then, of course, with the CERN, let's, acknowledge that there's a whole lot of people that are saying, they're doing some nefarious whoozy-was-its there. And I've got to agree that you don't spend that kind of money unless you're out to gain something somewhere. We've never spent that kind of money on pure science. Everybody that comes on up and gives me the other argument that I've had recently with some of the academics always brings up things like projects that ultimately lead to atom bombs and things. And the money was actually spent in the development of those weapons, not in the pure science that led to them. So
Hey,
the
Cliff,
arguments don't stand. Yeah,
I mean, it's well known since I mean Tesla said this in many ways. He said that Einstein essentially was all crap. It's just new age metaphysical stuff to mislead people. No,
right,
he said
exactly.
it pretty much
No,
in those
I know,
words too,
I know.
right?
Right, and
And
Einstein was a plagiarist to begin with, but
right,
yeah,
and Einstein's wife was from Croatia or whatever, where what was his name, Moscovich or something, the famous natural philosopher,
yeah,
had published all kinds of theories 200 years before or whatever. The whole thing was a scam, and that's what Tesla was saying. And if you look at Eric Dollard, if you know who he is, the guy
sure, yeah,
many people today consider to be the closest to Tesla, he has a nice paper called The Theory of Anti-Relativity. And it's a little too complicated to get into in an interview here. But the question is, what is time? What is the speed of light? What are these things? Do they even exist as we think we know them when you're not near a body like, let's say, the Earth? He has heard from sources within NASA, or he thinks they've intentionally leaked, the idea that when you're out in space far away from a big object, you actually can't even see the stars. In other words, it's complicated getting into what gravity is, what time is, and then you know about Rupert Sheldrake with the science delusion.
sure. And I would buy into a lot of the underlying message there. There's no question about that. The
The
idea that
constants
we
have changed.
exactly.
It's a fact that the constants have changed. So if they've changed with our limited understandings and limited abilities to travel, then think about that for a second. Then it might be totally different if you go out to Pluto. I mean, how do you know if you get outside of our, assuming that the sun is a comet, right? What if you get outside of the comet, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, we know that the interstellar space is not as we've been told because the Voyagers can't leave our solar system, no matter what they've tried, and they've tried some weird stuff. And it's not a matter of we're just getting close to the edge, close to the edge. They're reporting the hiss now is interstellar, and in itself it's a constant, even though it's irregular.
Yes, exactly. And so I think if you start looking at time, you have to ask yourself. Tesla was arguing that essentially things don't have energy in themselves. They only exist in the sense that they gather things from the medium, so to speak. So when you talk about something like plutonium, this has this tremendous amount of energy inside of it. From his point of view, that is not really
It's
the
not
best
true.
way of looking at it.
Right.
The way of looking at it, it has the ability, or in the current situation we have, to grab energy or direct energy or something. But if you put it in a place, I don't know, maybe in space somewhere far away from things, it would be totally different.
I agree, and that's an aspect. Again, that's a discussion or a reflection of how the yogic understanding which is that the multiplicity of the other elements and aspects that are nearby you influence what's going on. So here's some ways to consider, some things to consider about time. There's an ever-present now. That ever-present now is the collection of all the particles in all of universe, all reacting at the same instant to their environment around them in terms of our understanding as yogic beings of creation and destruction. So let's get back to the idea that we're being created and destroyed 22 trillion times a second, so fast that our minds can't conceive it. Let's also consider that universe needs to be defined very precisely as the sum total of all humanity's experience throughout all humanity's existence. Okay, so everything we experience, that is universe. And so there is nothing outside of universe. If it's inside our experience, then we've experienced it, and it's within our universe. And that includes all of our perceptions of time in all of its various different flavors. Now, time and energy, if you wanted to look at it at the very low particulate level, such as in the plutonium atom and so on, you can think of it as like Dr. Fred Bill would describe it, the atoms are being created and destroyed. He didn't quite get to the 22 trillion times a second issue in his discussions, but he says from the materium, from what I call the materium, from which universe is extracted. Okay, so the materium exists as all of all beings of all kinds that are existent everywhere in a non-material state. And from that, we extract universe, which is the sum total of all of humanity's experience throughout all of humanity's existence. And other creatures will extract their own universe from that same materium that will be different from humanity because they're not human. So anytime we bring up any of these aquatic creatures, we got real issues. So let's just bypass those guys and finish real quick with this time issue here, just in terms of the description. The thing about time is this. We use energy in order to measure anything. We use physical energy manifesting in our universe to motivate, use our devices, create them, all of this business. So energy is inextricably indivisible from our measurement of time. And thus, energy imposes upon that measurement its own restraints and constraints in terms of how we're going to view time and its impact on us. So we have to be cognizant of when we're measuring anything, including time, that the energy involved is as I say, is a necessary part of it. And to a certain extent, you're measuring the flow of energy from the materium into universe. That is to say, the flow of energy into your experience. So if you were to personally measure time by setting up a kitchen timer in front of you that ticked off once every second, and you experienced that tick, and then you'd wait the second, and then it would go tick again, and so on. If you personally experience that, then you're actually the input into universe, into the total sum of humanity, total sum of humanity's experience of that particular second's experience as you experienced it. And so, in that sense, even Chronos, in its mechanistic sense, is a lot about the energy that you put into watching that clock unwind after first putting the energy into setting it up and so on. So even at the scientific level, when we get into this, people are measuring time based on energy flow, which is, of course, what makes everything inconstant, including time, and that is because energy is not necessarily guaranteed to flow in at a constant rate under all circumstances. And at the yogic level, they expressed it in a certain way that we also see with Taoism and Brahmanism and Buddhism and so on, where they reference the if you will, the flavors of time at various different grand scales, all the way down to, as the Mayas did, all the way down to, personal biorhythms and this kind of a thing, which we all experience differently. Based on who we are in the circumstances we're in and manifesting. I know I experienced time differently in Europe than I did in Africa. I experience it differently there than I do in Asia. I experience it differently on a beach in Hawaii than I do on a beach in Washington, even though the same amount of actual chronos may be involved, 2 hours here, 2 hours there, the same time of day, and so on. I'm going to experience that time in a different fashion. So for people to describe time and think about time as an immutable substance or a barrier that we must overcome, I think the barrier exists in the mind first, and you need to start wrapping your head around some of the intricacies involved, as did, what's his name, starts with a K, I can't think of it at a moment, the Russian scientist who was exiled for a number of years, came back in he missed the scientific wave, but when he'd been off, he'd been thinking about time for years in this gulag, or in this exile, and he came back with a really interesting perspective on it. And then he voiced his perspective for about 18 or 20 months, and then he disappeared, never to be heard from again.
Cliff, I got a question for you. You know who Robert Monroe was, right?
You're going to have to tell me.
The out-of-body guy?
I know a couple of them, but go ahead.
Okay, so he did the books on out-of-body experiences and the Monroe Institute in Virginia.
Oh, okay, I know who you're talking about. Sure. Okay, Monroe Institute. Sure, yeah.
Okay, so I think towards the end of his life, he came to the conclusion that with the experiencing multiple lives, like a past life and a future life, that they didn't really run in order. So that maybe if you die, your next life will be set 500 years ago, and then the life after that would be 1,000 years from now. In other words, time is really a very seriously twisted construct that we have.
I would agree with that, and what tells me that I never held that opinion, never even thought that way. I was always trapped into linear thinking. I always thought that, oh, well, all the people that are alive in the baby boom now are because of all the people that died in World War II. Natural, causal, all of that. And then I went through this horrific time with my brother dying, and after he had died, when he was leaving the Bardo, he came and talked to me, and he told me where his next life is going to be, and it is indeed in our past. And so he told me basically so I could decide whether to go or not. I'm at a particular point where I may choose to do something other than follow my grand falloon, if you will. So that was just a huge shock to me that he had decided that he was going to go and remanifest in this particular culture in the past and experience it. And it was like a big slap upside the head that such a thing was conceivable. And as I say, I had never even conceived of it until basically being told by him that, hey guy, I'm heading out now. I'm cleansed out of the Bardo, and this is where I'm headed in case you want to look me up in the future. And so it was. So I would agree with that. His expression of that certainly. My brother's expression of that was exactly what you're talking about right there, is that time need not be as we think of it in terms of a linear progression. And so when we die this time, we don't have to incarnate, 20 years in the future or anything. You could if you wanted, I presume, but you need not.
But could you have many lives at once?
I've got some evidence that that's not the case, okay? That the idea of bubble lives, where you're living, where your consciousness is in all of these different bubbles, that may be true, but it's not many lives at once in the sense that your particular consciousness now has any relevance to these other consciousnesses. So in other words, that's true of all of us at some level, because all life and all consciousness goes back to a greater consciousness. And so it's just fractionalized to the point where, it gets bored, right? It's just sitting around, nothing to do. So it divides itself so it'd have somebody to talk to. And they were bored just sitting there. So they decided they would create couches. Then they had to have something to put the couches on. So they created a planet, and they needed something neat to look at. So they invented a tree, and they needed something on the tree. So they invented peaches, and there you go. And the next thing you know, they got bored with each other. And so that's why we got 10 billion of us. And, climbing on this planet alone, and in other planets. So in that sense, we are all part of that, all part of a single being having a multiple life experience. But on our individual consciousness level, no, I don't think that that's actually the case. When I had this experience that people describe as an enlightenment experience where time disappears and you're transported to somewhere else, and there's this incredible sharing of life force with all beings on the planet, both alive and dead, in your proximity and far away, and then you are presented with things, if you will. Your consciousness is presented with things, and not like psychedelic experiences where you may run into a particular kind of praying mantis creature that wants to present certain mathematical concepts to you. Rather, this is more like being presented things on a large screen television where you're just an active viewer of things that are being presented in a sense of no other consciousness, at least immediately directing it. And when presented with this, the part that I shared that's replicated in many of the Enlightenment experiences was this presentation of what's known as your universal face. Now, your universal face is what your face looks like. Yeah, I'm back. Yeah, it's a weird experience because, I'd done yoga since I was 11. I'd read about other people's experiences doing this kind of thing. It sets you up to a certain level of expectation in your mind, none of which materialized. And instead, it was an entirely different experience that was, transcendental, transfixing, transformative. And when presented with your universal face, you understand what's going on. There's no words. It's not like it's labeled, but there's an infinite variety of spheres, shiny reflective spheres that are suddenly in your vision. You don't know where they came from. You can look through them and see things there. You can see the reality around you. It doesn't obscure it, but you need not concentrate on either. You can choose to focus on one or the other, but of course it's so fascinating, your attention is instantly gravitated into this experience. And there's this huge number, I mean, beyond your ability to count, of these shiny, reflective, spheres. They're not like ball bearings. They're more like sort of like iridescent pearls. And if you focus your concentration on all of them, they all show you a face at maybe it's close to the same age you are at that moment. It did for me. They were all about the same age I was at that time. And there were some subtle and great differences between my face and those faces that were in these spheres. But the knowledge that they were all basically that they were all me, they were all this consciousness in different lives was there instantly. And if I looked at one in particular, or chose to look at a group, I would see commonalities and connections between these lives that shared, if you will, part of a karmic array or some way of thinking. I don't want to get too labeling here, but basically the experience was quite overwhelming. And I was quite certain it had taken at least 4 or 5 hours, because I looked at a number of these faces and interacted with this experience. And that was not all of the experience either. That was only about a third. Yeah, I'm back. Yeah.
Oh, you're back. Oh, good. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. You said that time is based on energy flow, is how you're looking at time. And I think a physicist would say something like the concept of time is that time moves forward, that it's the most probable outcome of the moment before. And those are like pretty different things. And I'm thinking it also, so that thought plus the thought that an energy flow has movement to it. So it's not a discrete thing. So I guess, can you comment on those different types of time?
Yeah, let's, everything in universe spins, okay? Everything in universe. Everything in what we extract from the materium into our experience is done in a spinning fashion. You're probably not aware of it, but every single molecule of hemoglobin, the heme part of the hemoglobin, spins as it goes through your system. And it does so, and it effectively cleans the arteries and so on in a healthy fashion. Your lymph system, the lymph substance itself, spins. Everything has a particular spin and a inherent direction of spin when we look at them in a static fashion. So when we look at molecules and so forth, we see that they have a left-handed spin or a right-handed spin. And curiously, certain things in universe, in our experience, our collective experience, are commonly spun to the left. And in fact, this is true of everything we ingest, okay, with the exception of vitamin E. There may be something else, but I'm unaware of it. Anything that we ingest that has a right-handed spin to the molecule is a poison, with the exception of vitamin E. Everything else that we take that's good for us spins to the left. Now, time, or all energy, derives from the materium, from the matrix. There's no energy that is created in the universe, in our experience. It all comes from somewhere else. We are recipients of it. We think we can change it and we can deal with it, but all energy basically is the same. The same energy that motivates the heme in our blood to spin is the same energy that motivates the molecules of the plant to spin a particular way, and so on. And that's because the energy, as it's coming through in this constant creation destruction model of universe, as it comes through, as it creates itself for that brief 22 trillion times of a second, it is in essence in a state of transitory movement. The 22 trillion times a second captures it in its little stages of movement, and we see that in our 30 or 40 frames per second way of viewing things. So, okay, so now having said that everything spins, let's also look at the idea that the precursors to our thinkers, the great thinkers of the past, we know nothing about. We're really ignorant. There's volumes and volumes and volumes written in Sanskrit that have never ever been translated into English that deal with the subject of time in all of its multiplicities. And a lot of them were translated into German, and that's as far as it went. But in some of these things that have been discussed in other volumes that I happen to have stumbled across, one of the ideas came across that time, that energy by which we use to motivate ourselves in this material world, and the energy by which we use to count ticks in time and think and pump our blood, all of this comes in with a particular sort of a spin from left to right. And they called that the generative spin. And if you had that spin magnified and looked everywhere around the world or in the material world around you, you would see that everything had this spin that was going in that particular direction. Now, this is where it gets really weird and complicated, because we say that time is progressive, linear. It goes from 1 second to the next, but there are instances in which that need not be the case, and there's evidence that people understood this in the past and have used such knowledge to their advantage in various different practical ways. So, for instance, one of those advantages is discussed both by yogic and Taoist literature, and it has to do with what is known as the generative versus degenerative, not in the sense of degenerate, but rather opposite to the generative force, spins. And so here the thinking in the Taoist thing was that, well, I'm sitting here meditating, I've elevated my consciousness to where I can see the molecules creating themselves in the plants around me, and the dahlias are gorgeous as their blooms are expressing themselves here from this energetic matrix and creating themselves, and they're all spinning to the left, and my consciousness is participating in this, and I can see myself fade out into the molecules, and my consciousness is aware of myself spinning to the left as all of my matter is being created. But then my consciousness itself stops, and it is still, and it sees that the universe around it is spinning to the left. Its experience of the universe is spinning to the left. And then one day, that consciousness says, the will behind that consciousness says, and it tries, and it tries, and it can stop the spin, or it can reverse it. And then things get real interesting.
I would say, what happens?
Well, that's the secret of the Wei Ming Ching. That's what's known as the secret to the immortality. It's the understanding of the being able to bridge and go through. There are too many things that are beyond the nature of words for a conversation to be meaningful unless you go to some length, and I'm talking about months, of sitting down and defining a bunch of stuff before you get to start discussing the effect of that. But some of the grosser effects are the ability to, if you wish, apply that to yourself through a force of will and not age from that point on, or slow the aging process, or control it in a way, to understand the nature of the spin within individuals, not necessarily yourself, be able to express that in the form of healing. All different kinds of, a plethora of practical uses exist from this ability once it's discovered and mastered. And such as John Chang, the magus of Java, he spins counterclockwise when he meditates. Once you've gotten to that point, once you understand, and here's a real clue to it, here's a practical way to approach it. It'll drive you absolutely crazy. You may kill yourself, so, really, really understand this, that the saying is that we owe our understanding to the 10,000 martyrs who died in the process of learning what we're learning now about how consciousness works and all of this from the Taoist viewpoint, okay, the spinning part. It's real simple to describe. The words are somewhat meaningless unless you're going to sit down and do it. But once you do it and you grasp it, then the words become very instantly clear, very meaningful, and you don't need them anymore. Okay, but here's basically what you do. You sit down and you start meditating in whatever form, standing, running, whatever your meditation form is. Now, if you close your eyes, let me just ask, if you close your eyes and the room is light or you're sitting there and the room is dark, what is your perception out of your eyes? What do your eyes show you when you just sit here right now and close your eyes? Hopefully nobody's driving.
I have a darkness, and I have a center in the middle.
And do you have perception of color?
A slight, yes, there's some blue around the center in the middle.
And no other color anywhere else?
Correct.
And is there a central light that's focusing on your face to cause a central light effect? Or you're in a darkened room, or?
Well, I'm in a regular room with one light.
Okay. Because see, here's the thing: if you go to a darkened room, if you go to a place where there's an absent a light source, in other words, you see through your eyelids. Okay. The idea is that if you go into a room and there's a bright light there, and you shut your eyes, or you're out in the sunlight and you shut your eyes, you will be able to detect and see light coming through those eyelids. So light is, your eyelids are permeable to light at various different levels. So let me suggest how this works. You sit and you meditate in a dark place where there's no visible source of light. Now, you can train yourself up to a certain point, and a lot of people do it by looking at candles or unwavering lights, all different kinds of things. But they do it with light. Some people can do it with sound. That was not my approach. Light was what got me there, so that's what I can speak to with authority. But there's other ways of getting here. Other people can do it with vibration as well. But anyway, so you're sitting there. You're in a darkened room, and you close your eyes, and you get a sensation of what people call false light. It is not false. It is photons that are triggering on your rods and cones that is coming from, at some point, the creation of those rods and cones themselves. They're just simply reacting to their own being created, if you will. And when you do this, you'll notice that the pattern is that there is no real pattern to start with. It's sort of like the noise you would see on TV in the 50s, right? In the 60s, when there was no stations broadcasting, pre-digital, in an analog stage. It's just sort of hissy kind of thing going on. Okay, only there's no noise in my particular approach to this. And you're meditating, and then you notice that there seems to be a slight coherence to this, and you just allow yourself to be in this no words place. You will discover that the universe, that is to say, at that point, the light that you're focusing on as it's creating itself within those rods and cones, wants to spin from the left to the right. And so you can just let it. And many people, it happened to me as well, when it hits you, it can be so visceral that it will literally upset your system. Literally, you can get vertigo, you can fall over, you think you have vertigo, your whole universe is spinning. It is that powerful when it occurs. And it can happen some days after a particularly profound meditative session going towards this effect. So just be advised, it can be that powerful, and you got to be aware of what the hell's going on. Anyway, once it's occurred, once you notice that it can start to spin, then you can start to interact with that spin. You can do the same things again to accommodate it within your meditation and allowing it to spin. And then pretty soon you'll see that there's an outer spin that's at one particular flow rate, and it goes on down until it's a center spin. Now, bear in mind, this is in the absence of light. Okay, until you master it, you can't really do it in the presence of the sun or any other light source. Then you can extract the energy and watch it come in this fashion and rotate it also within yourself. But you need the experience of doing it because it's an exercise of willpower. Then, okay, so it's spinning from left to right. That's known as the generative spin, the native spin of universe, the spin at which you're being created. If you read the Hui Ming Ching, which is all of 2 pages long with diagrams, a Chinese document of immeasurable worth, also known as Embracing the Ultimate or the Cultivation of the Life Energy. You can get them on Amazon. But if you read this and look at the diagrams, it says, once you understand this, it says, once you see this thing spinning, try and spin it the other way. And then watch what happens to your whole body and your whole universe. And once you try spinning it to the other way, then a whole lot of stuff comes to you. Some of the elements will present themselves and you'll have no choice over it. It'll just happen. And I've had the experience of the golden dust, it's called, which you can go look up and read about that. It's quite involved. So I've had a couple of these experiences that were totally unwitting, unwilling, and unbidden. And they come for whatever reason universe decides. But then there's also a whole set of skills and interactions with the spin that can take you to a different level of being a human, really, if you want to think about it that particular way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, the spinning part of it is relatively easy once you understand it's an act of will. And then once you accomplish that, once your willpower has allowed you to stop the spin, and then you grind back up against it with your willpower, from that point on, I don't remember that day. I don't remember it ever being more difficult or more easy from that day forward. I just can go into a state and I'm instantly there. So I've seen sadhus, I've seen fakers, I've seen the fakir, I've seen spiritual people of all kinds. And anybody that's going to tell me that they've had a series of experiences, and this is based on my own comparison now with my own set of experiences, that's going to tell me that, oh, well, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to do a bunch of stuff and go into a spiritual state. It's like, no, you're an asshole. You're a bastard. You're a real faker. You're a fraud. Because once you've mastered this, you step into it. It's instantaneous. There's no transition. The people I've met that can do things like this, that have also encountered the spin or else the hiss. There's another way of thinking about it. I almost went that way, but I'm not natively sound oriented. But this one guy I know, he got there through the hiss. He was able to take the noise of creation, this constant psst noise that's always there if you know where to listen for it. And he was able to push that back, he said, and make it go back the other way and be a noise. And that's where he got his ability. And so basically it's the same thing. He's pushing the generative force in the other way through willpower. And this guy's an amazing guy. He's been doing a lot longer than I have, and he's got the extra abilities that are gained from 30 years of deliberate celibacy. Just an amazing fellow, all Italian guy. That who knows how old he is. Made a ton of money, and I'm talking in hundreds of millions. Gave it all away and has disappeared, and I haven't heard from him from a couple of years. There's a few rumors of him here and there, and he's off doing who knows what. But I'm sure it's quite interesting. But he got there through sound, and he was a violinist or some kind of a string musician before he got into meditation. So there are different ways to approach it. And we both know, he knew of a guy and I knew of a guy, from both of us from a different viewpoint, that got there from being able to control the vibration that comes out of creation. So see, the idea is that when in this 22 trillion times a second creation destruction model of universe, also understood by the yogis, as each and every one of those creation acts occurs, there are these side effects, if you will, of all of the attributes expressing themselves. And you can use your consciousness to glom onto one of those side effects and use it to your benefit in these traditional yogic and Taoist techniques.
November, Tango, Uniform, Mike, Echo, Hotel, Oscar, Bravo, Zulu.
Yeah, I'm back.
Yes.
Oh, I hear you. There you are. Well, thanks
Yeah,
to
you're right.
our alien overlords for letting the call back.
Yeah, this is really weird. Yeah.
You can't watch the movie They Live enough.
Yeah, exactly. It's like no, I did catch what he was saying, and it's exactly the same thing. You see all of these various different approaches. Alchemy, the one point. That's what it means. Alchem. At its base means 1 point. And of course, that's the root of the keep 1 point in Aikido. And when you cross the rainbow bridge is their way in Aikido of referring to pushing back against this universal force and making it go the other way. We see it in the various different forms of magic and expressed. And look at what the witches do. They go widdershins. If you look back at that root word, which means they go counterclockwise. And so they would always walk around the cauldron, boil, right? Well, they're boiling the very matrix, the stuff, the false light, if you will, the fake light, the real light that's coming through to your eyes at the point of creation. It's all built in, all over there. Because you'll see that in Disney, when they're doing it in the movies, they actually are going counterclockwise. And there's you look for the symbols of the clockwise versus counterclockwise spin, and you'll see how much the Illuminati and these kind of people know about this.
What about people who bilocate?
There's another issue. that's a known level of the city. Let me just point out, by the way, that CERN is a big damn circle. And they're going against the grain, so to speak. But okay, Bilocation is one of the known cities, and I was sort of tempted to go that route, and I made a bet with a guy that I told him, look, if you ever hear of an incident in the White House of a naked quasi-white man running around in there causing problems, it'll be me in a bilocation state, because I know what I've been told that I've had shared with me that the words that are allowed as a guide for these various different cities once you've reached certain states. And I've been sort of tempted to go that route. It requires a certain amount of effort because, of course, the instant your will is taken away from it, the other body disappears. But for an instant, what you're doing is you're taking your energy and projecting that energy within the greater matrix of the energy elsewhere, and you're sitting there, and you keep a certain amount of your energy sitting there, about 10% or more, this part of your thread, your Shoshona. And then you separate the other part of the Shoshona and attach it to your will and take that and project it to where you want it to go, allow it to spin and create a body, but it doesn't create a whole body, a complete body. It just sort of looks like it. It can be at various stages of everything from ephemeral to fairly tough, but it's not as though your real body is as you're still sitting there. But this practice has certain consequences, and you've got to know about how to do it. And so I've never really gone that route. But, it's been known and written up, and it's described in the chapter or in section 3 of the Science of Yoga, along with the other cities. Although, of course, they don't provide you with the clues on how to exercise them there. They were wise enough to separate those.
Well, it's just kind of an interesting concept.
I have a question that's kind of related. I was wondering what you felt about the idea of whether it's possible, if it's not possible for time travel physically, what do you think of time travel in the astral or during dreams?
I don't know that there's any way to judge that in an accurate fashion, okay? With my recent experience with the remote viewers, I know for a fact that they were able to key in on the consciousness, but absent the consciousness in the future as an anchor, they weren't able to get much of any of the context or any of that. And so that level of projection, okay, now there's a couple of things. If you read the Science of Yoga, there are some areas, and also the Taoists discuss it, where they warn you, don't go here. It doesn't pay to do that. And I've done some of those things stupidly in my youth, and I know I've learned enough being burned to take those warnings seriously. And so a couple of the things are that you have to be aware that when you astrally relocate, if you're actually good at it and you're doing it, and you're not simply diluting your already diluted mind, which you have to always have at the forefront of your thinking, is working on a limited number of senses, on a limited number of frames per second, in a highly complex world that's creating itself 22 trillion times a second. If you do this astral projection, you can allow yourself to a vulnerable state insofar as your body is concerned, and who knows what the risk is to the consciousness if your body is left and it becomes damaged. So people that do that for real put themselves at a great deal of risk. Those guys that I know that had a talent for it, they brought it into this life, may also have had known enough intuitively to also be able to avoid some of the dangers, have told me even they are somewhat intimidated by what they find out there. And so it's not anything I really recommend. But most of it, you've got to be cognizant of the issue of time and consciousness the same way you do taking psychedelics. In any form of altered state, your chronos is disconnected. Therefore, the perceptions of time are going to be as you basically, to a certain extent, choose to perceive them. And that can be delusionary. I don't go traveling about. I've done that once with a particular prescribed thing prior to my brother's death. I wanted to see how much of the bullshit of the stuff I'd been told about the Bardo was accurate. I felt I had good, strong key energy. I put myself at risk. I satisfied myself that as to the validity of what I've been told. And it was a stupid and dumb thing to do, in spite of the knowledge that it brought back. And I would never advise anybody to do any of those procedures.
Well, I noticed that the question came about actually something that's happened to me several times, actually in dreams. I mean, I haven't deliberately sat out to go traveling, but there was one in particular and it was one of the most powerful dreams I've ever had. And I'm what my native elder friend calls a dreamer, so I dream a lot. But in this particular case, to make it a very short story, I suddenly found myself, and it was, whatever date in the 1940s it was, and Gandhi was about to be assassinated, and I'm standing there by the train station, and everybody looks like it's the proper time and right clothing and everything, and a voice tells me, you really are, this is very unusual, but you really are here, but you must remember there are some rules, and one of them is you must not prevent the assassination, which when I woke up later, because the dream went on from there, but I mean, I was almost sick when I woke up because I was so trembling so badly. But I remember thinking, if I was warned about that, does that mean I was really there? And that implies that time could be messed with. And because it was such a powerful experience, that's why, I mean, I suppose anything's possible. It could just be illusion or something. But usually when I dream, I can tell the difference between dreams that are just my mind working things out from things during the day, and when something is like a dream of power, and this was certainly a dream of power. And that was why I wondered, because even if we could not necessarily travel in time physically, can we travel in time astrally or in the dream world? And I would suspect a dream would be safer simply because it's happening spontaneously.
I would agree that that's the case, and that's probably why it occurs, is because the construct of the reality that your mind is dealing with in the dream state provides you a level of safety that, if that construct is removed, would be threatening. Because indeed, you may have been actually not traveling so much as obviously experiencing that time. Was it a re-experience? Was it a new experience? Is going to be hard to say, and actually may be meaningless in the sense of the discussion anyway, because the experience undoubtedly is real at some level.
So I'm thinking that a time traveler, that being vulnerable as a time traveler would be being out of sync with the world that you're traveling to, that you're visiting.
Well, that's the theory, John Titor and all that as you get further and further out, your vibratory rate becomes a problem.
Yeah.
So that you could only time travel, a few hundred years or something. If you wanted to go a few thousand, you essentially couldn't survive or something, fit in.
You mean materially? Like physically,
Yeah.
corporeally travel?
Well, we're off on the deep end here of, the John Titor school of
I have some issues
science.
with Titor's presentation.
But what really attracts me that it must be true is that he's going back to get, Unix. And and I'm a big Unix lover, so
I
gotcha.
No, I'm just joshing. But if you're going to go back,
that's worth getting.
A military industrial project, right? Civilization has been destroyed, and what are you going to do?
They can get you back through time.
They can get you back through time. You can only get one thing. What are you going to go for? Unix.
Right.
Yeah.
There you go.
I like that. But
But
but I thought that was the idea, that your body simply can't, the vibratory rates start to get out of sync so far that you could only go back 100 years or 200 years or something.
But then that's
the
saying
theory.
that's saying that time is linear then, because otherwise, if time was kind of instantaneous all around us, then you wouldn't matter how far back in time you went.
Well, yeah, but now we're getting into the question of whether this is even real. And actually, I don't agree with that. But Cliff, go ahead.
I was going to say you're correct about that, but think about it this other way. It has to do with the complexity that we're expressing. We express a level of complexity that is different, far different from that of our ancestors, both in the pollutants that is in our bodies, and if you think about it, tied to the idea of the 22 trillion times a second, this universal pulse that creates us all is creating the pollution that's in our bodies. Okay, so right now I've got some high level of
I've seen out of the body traveler.
You've seen a witch?
Oh, somebody who was out of their body and visiting me. I could see them, and I wasn't happy, so I told them to go away.
I've seen that. I've had that experience as well. Yeah. where I was seeing someone who was not materially there, who was projecting their consciousness there, looking into the welfare, actually basically the welfare of Kathy. This was one of her relatives that was deceased and was basically checking out to see how his progeny had done. You can do that kind of you can do that kind of thing in the bardo when you're cleansing yourself. You have the ability to deal with issues like that. Especially the more key you take with you, the more directed that experience can be by yourself, and the less at the whim of the machine, if you will, however you want to think about it. That's what those creatures, the praying mantis call it the machine. They call it the machine. The process of life and death to them is the machine. To the Buddhists, it's the bardo, and it thinks I'm a little kinder disposed towards it. But that idea of dreams and so forth, the mind is extremely powerful then. And look at the individuals that have dreams where the dream context ruptures and they have all kinds of problems. You can actually dream yourself into heart attacks. I knew of this one Filipino girl whose brother had died under traumatic circumstances, and she was plagued by this dream of a tiger attacking her year after year after year. She hardly ever slept. She'd wake up 6 or 8 times in a night. We happened to be jointly in an Aikido session north of here in Seattle, and she was maybe, I don't know, 11 or 12 at the time, and had been suffering this for like 6 or 7 years. And so, I told her basically how to do Aikido against a tiger in her dream. And she told me later that, that's what she did. She actually did as I instructed and accepted her death in the dream at the hands of the tiger, but fought, because see, that's basically what courage is. I shall die, but I'm going to fight anyway, right? Then once you say to yourself, I'm going to die now, today is a good day to die, watahe, let us express our death here today, then at that point I have nothing further to lose, and so I can concentrate on expressing my art. And you rid yourself of fear, and that's what she did. And she was able to face the tiger, which basically, of course, was, if you were talking to a Freudian shrink, was the repressed issues of her brother being killed in the Philippines and so on and so on. And so, but she was able to shed that dream issue because the dream state was so tenuous for her that the tiger was threatening her life every night when she would go to sleep. And I know people that have been plagued by that, and you need to do certain things within the dreams. The magic that is taught by these individuals that, like the mages, many of it is symbolic. So if you have bad dreams and issues and you want to separate yourself from it in a non-violent fashion, look at your hands in your dream. Spread your fingers and concentrate on seeing your fingers and stuff. And when you do that, because of the eye-brain-hand connection, the dream goes away, or changes the context in which you're dreaming. So those kind of things are quite powerful. So I do believe the dreams protect you when you do recover those memories or go to that time, however you want to think about it. But it's the context that makes it safe. Doing it without that is risky.
This particular one didn't feel like a past life. I mean, I've had a lot of dreams that are and actually even like intentional meditation journeys where there seems to be past life memories, but this one felt different from that. This one really, and some of the other things that I don't really want to go into right now.
Are we going
it
again?
was like I've been sent back because I was supposed to hear a message, and unfortunately I woke up.
You're back, Cliff?
Yeah, back again. Is it just me or so just my line?
For the most part, yes, but Plane is having an issue reacting with you. He can't hear half of what you're saying.
That's odd.
That's interesting because he's the host.
Well, it's just not very conducive for an interview when your host can't hear the guest.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's the best kind of interview. Who knows?
Well, they're just whatever, testing us, I guess. Hey, do you want to get into the whole question of timelines at all?
Sure. I have no problem with that. I think it's bullshit.
Well, we kind of got that idea from you.
Yeah.
But see, I've got a real solid basis for that because there's this continuous creation destruction cycle going on. So within the universe that we're all experiencing right now, we're all experiencing the same constant, ever-present now that exists at this moment. Here, it also exists in Sirius and in the Pleiades, everywhere, as the universe is creating all of us at 22 trillion times a second. So The whole concept of timelines, and it requires a different construct to universe as I've experienced it, and so it is beyond my experience. There's no support whatsoever, no evidence whatsoever to support multiple timelines, and boy, isn't it a convenient out.
Yeah, well, I kind of well, first of all, I'm experienced with remote viewing, and um, I've got a theory that the Earth is held up by turtles, right, all the way down.
Sure.
And
I've heard that theory. In
right.
fact, I know the woman that promulgated it.
Okay. Well, the most powerful turtle has really amazing psychic abilities and suppresses our ability to see the future. And so that's why we have mediocre results when we do psychic stuff for the future.
Okay, and there's also, to a certain extent, there's I really do think, it's not a belief, it's not I wish this to be true, but I have evidence to suggest that the closer we are able to examine the future, the more that interferes, our consciousness projects out and interferes with that manifesting. And so truly, when we look at the future, it changes because we're looking at it. But here's something else. In terms of physical, corporeal time travel, there may be some evidence in our past to support that idea. The military thinks that indeed that is the case. By that I mean DOD. They've got 5 particular episodes that they see as being pivotal points where something occurred that actually changed the very complexity of the manifestation of our universe at that point, and they're putting it down to potentially a time traveler. And the last one was this period here with the loss that was coincident with the loss of the electricity at the Super Bowl. There was a frequency that occurred that caused all kinds of problems with electronic equipment beyond just simply the New Orleans area. And that's recently been upgraded, I've heard, to potentially one of these, and is the 5th of these potential periods in which things have changed. Now, I don't know what specifically they're talking about the change is in this episode. One of the previous ones, of course, was the resonance of sound that allowed Stradivarius to build these kind of instruments before, but not after a particular date. And everything was the same that anybody could tell other than the time expression itself. And so they think that that's actually occurred, and it may well have. It's rather interesting that they came to the conclusion and that DOD was able to categorize based on some level of analysis, not just, pulling a couple of dates out of your hat kind of a deal, but an analysis of, and they arrived at 4 specific times in our past that they were of the opinion that the expression of time in our material universe changed in a fundamental way. And so now anybody who believes in timelines will say, oh, it's real simple. We just, shift it over to another timeline. Well, that's one way of thinking of it. It's quite valid to think of it that way. I think it's erroneous, but that's neither here nor there. It is a convenient way to think of it because something occurred afterwards. Now, the amount of energy required to express that change was truly phenomenal, in that its residue affected our whole planet, and violins and all of musical instruments, and all music ever after. And in another case, it affected history itself, insofar as how the military thinks about it. So corporeal time travel, or at least...
Yankee, Hotel, Foxtrot, Group.
Hey, Dan, you're going to be amused. I'd seen all this in a dream.
Why didn't you warn us?
I have lots of dreams about the future. Because the irony of it is, it doesn't do me any damn good. I have the dreams about the future, about these little petty things like that, right? It doesn't tell me go buy Apple stock or something, right?
Well, wait a second. I missed that. What was in your dream?
He's being facetious again.
No, actually, I'm telling the truth.
No. Tell me your precog dream. Tell me.
Well, I have a lot of them. And anyway, Dan just had some sentence about how this is going to be, this is really disappointing because we were having a good conversation at different points, but all the interruptions really ruined the flow.
Sure.
And yeah. Well, I'd exactly what he said in the context of it, I had seen in a dream not that long ago. That's
Yeah.
all. I have a lot of them about conversations.
Oh,
Far
interesting.
more,
Okay.
far more than like pictures of events like TV. They're not. They're conversations, and I know the words that are about to come. And I used to have it all the time. Um, and then once, when my father died, I knew the whole context after that when I'm meeting with relatives and so on. And it was just so shocking to me and depressing that there was like a 2 year period where they all went away, and then they've gradually come back over the last 15 years or whatever.
When those dreams went away, were you in a dreamless state in your sleep, or did you have other types of dreams?
No, I had dreams. I just I didn't have them. I think it was just too personal. Your father dying is just too dramatic or something. But then gradually they've come back, but they're almost always about useless conversations. In this, in the broader scheme of things, they're not something you
Sure.
can profit from, or there's
Right.
nothing actionable about them.
Yeah, a
So,
lot
hey.
of times universe reveals itself this way to us in what it gives us through dreams or takes away. For instance, I haven't had a dream in I don't know how long. I mean, they're so rare as to be unique. But your issue of them not revealing anything, you may need to look at them as patterns, though, not as the individual dreams, but what does a collection of dreams over a few days reveal to you in terms of the kind of conversation. So, for instance, I know from uh, a personal level on a couple of different occasions where I've been presented with odd words showing up in a universe pattern that really should not have been there. And yet at the same time, universe provided. And if I'd paid attention, I would have saved myself a lot of damn grief in a couple of times because the universe was clearly warning me, don't be an ass, don't do this. And I would go ahead and do it anyway, right? Like take a bunch of people down the Nisqually River on a raft when the universe told me through some words I should not have. And the presentation of these words is not random. Because bear in mind, we don't live in a random universe. There is no such thing as meaningless coincidence. Universe is highly structured. It materializes 22 trillion times a second, basically for our benefit. And so for us to discount what it provides really is a sort of a stupid way to look at things. No offense.
Yeah, well, clearly,
I mean, let me give you
I
a
think
real...
dreams have lots of meaning. I mean, besides the precognitive aspect of it, I mean, there's clearly some element of it. It's telling you ought to think about something.
Exactly.
Right.
And maybe it's triggering a certain level of your linguistic centers. Okay. And so from a linguistic viewpoint, say that it gave you 6 or 7 words in a dream. And well, the thing to do would be to write those words down the first time that you become both conscious and aware of those words, right? Just write the 6 or 7 words down and then come back and refer to them 2 or 3 times throughout the day and then see how they materialize, always keeping this little log going of, oh, I see what it was. It was, this kind of word, these kind of words came from this particular experience. And so my thinking at this point is just a bit of advice would be to say that, well, maybe there's a pattern in the types of words and the people that they'll be coming from. So maybe you get certain kinds of impressions, good, bad, negative, up or down, emotional, flat, or whatever, from certain kind of people you'll be encountering in the future. And maybe this is your universe's way of telling you your perception, your consciousness as it extends into the future, because it's not locationally bound only to this time, as it is also experiencing the future, is telling you, hey, dude, hey, pay attention. You're going to have to see Aunt Mabel here, and it's not going to be a good thing. That kind of a deal, right? And so you can get yourself emotionally prepared. Who knows what the point of the message is? I'm just saying that there may be more to it than that. I've had weird things occur often enough and don't have a perspective that coincidence is in any way meaningless. And so I never take any of the universe inputs that I can possibly get as being anything other than input just for my benefit. And I have to do stuff. There's an obligatory part of interacting within the matrix, our material world, the matrium here, the material universe, and our emotional response and what we get out of it, what we have to put back into it. But if people are shoved into your life, I stop and say, okay, especially when I'm traveling and stuff, because then I'm at my most effective insofar as being a universal tool, right? because then I'm free floating in the sense that I don't have any normal attachments. And if universe wants to prod me, I'm already in motion. It's a dynamic sense of, like in Aikido. If you have an Aikido guy standing there facing a Tai Chi master, it's going to be the most boring fight ever because no one is going to do anything. They're not going to attack each other, right? They may shake hands to start it off.
That's going to be quite a fight.
Exactly.
Pay-per-view is not going to work very well on that.
Exactly. So it doesn't work that way. But if you get anybody attacking an Aikido fellow or a Tai Chi master, basically they will stand there and let the other person become involved in motion. Once they're in motion, all the rules change for everybody, especially if you know how to deal with motion, because the issues of inertia, resistance, and friction and so on have shifted in your favor if you're prepared to deal with bodies in motion that way. And so I like to think of myself when I travel, infrequently as it is, especially these days, as one of those bodies in motion that's prepared to be prodded by universe. And it's weird the way universe will provide you with strange experiences where your particular input may provide some level of key interaction for the people you're interacting with. And I've had such strange things where there was this guy who was an ex-priest who I met on an airplane ride, and I don't like priests and all of this, but nonetheless we formed a weird kind of a connection that 2 years later was key to him when he was dying. And so it was just really odd the universe provided that connection to this person out of the blue. But when I'm traveling like that, I make a point of being open to those kind of things because they are extremely meaningful, especially on a karmic level. So I wouldn't be as dismissive that you're not necessarily getting the information. More probably it's like, hey, primate, look at this a different way, and maybe you'll see it in a different pattern emerging.
Oh, for sure. I actually think all of the glimpses that we see, the psychic type glimpses of the future, of the past, or whatever, are important, for sure. I'm just saying that it is a bit disappointing. It would be nice to feel that they were more usable in the real world,
sure,
as opposed to just hints.
Yeah.
It's kind of like messages to yourself. Remember to meditate more, or stuff like, it's like, okay, go to bed on time, that kind of stuff. I wish you were.
Yeah, the mom and 6 years old kind of stuff. Pick up your room. Yes.
No, I'm just kidding, but it's conversations typically with a number of people in a public setting, not just like two people. It's more like when there are four people together, and it's anyway. It's a very interesting phenomenon. I don't know about others' precog dreams, but they say it's the most common psychic phenomenon that we know of. I'm not sure. I think the sense of danger might be the most common, actually, to tell you the truth. But anyway, well, getting to the psychic stuff, let's get back to that wonderful multiple timeline stuff.
Am I gone?
Go into, because I'm familiar with remote viewing, so let's go into that a bit. I would say that for past and present, something happened?
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to Clif and the other hosts. We sure got a lot to chew on. So thanks for joining us. Take care until next time. Bye.